In June 1815, two armies gathered on the plains of southern Belgium for an epic battle that would change the face of Europe. What became known as the Battle of Waterloo resulted in a victory for an alliance of forces commanded by English general the Duke of Wellington, and defeat for the French forces commanded by Napoleon Bonaparte. Until its final hours, the outcome of this epic battle, with its 50,000 casualties in just one day, was in doubt. But the outcome for the winner and loser at Waterloo would be far more certain. In this program, we look at the changed fortunes of two giants of their age after the battle that changed the course of their nations and Europe.
In one sense, Napoleon made Wellington. There would not have been a major European conflict without the French Revolution and then Napoleon.
Napoleon's main legacy was modern France. He was in many ways the creator of modern France. And the legal system that he imposed really became the legal system for the European Union. So you can see today in the architecture of Paris, in the legal system, in the administrative system, in the educational system, all of these really were created by Napoleon. As far as Wellington's greatest legacy, it's the defeat of Napoleon.
The more you stand back from Napoleon's life and career, the more extraordinary and without precedent it appears. There have been plenty of imitators. There still are. But there's no precedent.
The backgrounds of these two titans of the first half of the 19th century couldn't have been more different. Wellington, an Anglo-Irishman, went to Eton and said Waterloo had been won by the values instilled on its playing fields.
Napoleon was from Corsica. His was a more modest background. His father was an attorney, and the young Napoleon was an avid reader and good at mathematics. Wellington was deeply conservative, a monarchist who spoke French, and was a supporter of France's ancient regime, the Bourbons.
Wellington saw in Napoleon something that was anathema to him. The idea that such a phenomenon could occur was simply alien to his nature. It had to be resisted. He never called him the Emperor. He always called him Bonaparte. Sign of complete contempt, not even so much for Napoleon, but for what France had become, what the French had done to themselves. In the eyes of Napoleon's great adversaries, he was nothing but the revolution on horseback. He was a continuation of it. He was their worst nightmare.
Napoleon had made his name as a military commander in the French Revolution and its aftermath, and was a supporter of its principles.
Up to then, nobody from that sort of background had been the head of a state where he was his own master. And that's why people, even those who hate him, don't quite know how to deal with this.
As battlefield commanders, they differed too, but both gave particular regard to topography and the study of maps, and were at ease with mathematics, given that trigonometry had a crucial function in the placement of artillery on the battlefield.
Wellington was a remarkably courageous man physically, a man of enormous presence and courage. Wellington was hands-on. Now, Wellington never commanded large formations to the extent Napoleon did. Napoleon's approach was much more like Nelson's. Band of brothers, let's sit down, let's talk about this. Wellington was very much a top-down, hands-on, shut it down, control freak. But you knew where you were with him. He took all responsibility onto himself. And the fact that he could do so and command such loyalty says a lot about him. He was known to be someone who didn't give up. He had a backbone of iron.
In fact, Wellington never lost a battle. Napoleon, a rousing and charismatic commander, instilled huge loyalty in his troops. He commanded far larger armies and won 60 of an incredible 70 battles he fought.
Napoleon was tremendously charismatic. He wasn't just that kind of false, artificial charisma that some dictators in history have built up around them. He actually genuinely was the real thing. He was the genuine article. He was funny, he was clever, he was somebody who could encapsulate great ideas in a single aphorism. He was extremely attractive to women, he was a natural leader, and as well, a very, very impressive writer. And so altogether, he had all those things that you need in order to promote your charisma.
He was a commander who his men respected deeply. I always think you have to remember that. From the very beginning of his career, say at the Siege of Toulon, as a very young officer, he put himself about. He put himself in the front ranks. He went into the most dangerous positions. He was physically brave. He was never far from the action. What marks him out is his white horse, Marengo. Marengo was a white Arab stallion. He was named after Napoleon's first great victory. But Marengo's a bit like Lassie. There are lots of them. And part of the reason there are lots of them is they keep being shot out from under him, you know, or he'll hand them over to maybe a hospital sector that needs it, but, you know, usually being wounded or something. So he always has plenty of white Marengos. But that's how his soldiers and indeed the enemy pick him out. They see that white horse, they know he's there, and he always shows himself. Insofar as possible, he always lets his troops know he's there, and that inspires confidence. He speaks to as many forward units as he can. He explains what he wants from them, what he's trying to do, what they're supposed to do. He doesn't just issue them orders. He doesn't patronize them. And personally, I think there you do see the continuation of the revolutionary spirit. These men are not serfs. They might be conscripts, but they're citizens and they're soldiers, and you treat them with respect.
By the time of Waterloo, France, under Napoleon, had been at war with much of Europe and with England for more than 20 years. Napoleon had transformed France and its society after the French Revolution and had presided over a new French empire built on the back of stunning military victories like that at Austerlitz. Napoleon had even crowned himself Emperor of the French. But after a series of military catastrophes, notably in his ill-fated and disastrous Russian campaign in the winter of 1812, he was forced to abdicate and went into exile on the Italian island of Elba.
Wellington, a lifelong Francophile who'd studied in France as a young man and spoke fluent French, moved here to Paris as British ambassador under the newly restored Bourbon monarchy. But just as the European powers had begun the task of restoring their continent to normality and peace, news came that Napoleon had escaped from Elba and landed back in France.
19 days later, after landing near Cannes on the south coast and traversing the Alps in the depths of winter along a route which became known as La Route Napoleon, he was in Paris and resumed his title of emperor. His army rallied to him. The soldiers who'd been captured in the years of fighting were released, allowing Napoleon to reform his Grande Armée. The Duke of Wellington and Britain's European allies had to reassemble their armies to resume the war to overthrow the emperor yet again.
He had come, I think, to believe, after a series of incredible victories, that not just he himself, but his boys could do anything. And they all believed that.
The two sides converged for a showdown on the plains of southern Belgium, near the small town of Waterloo. Wellington, a cautious and tactical commander, had fought successive defensive battles against Napoleon's armies in the Peninsular Wars in Spain and Portugal. At Waterloo, he chose this option again. positioning himself on a ridge between and among two farmhouses that provided plenty of cover against a French advance. His position laid out, Wellington then formed his troops into defensive squares, which further helped blunt the French charges, until General Blucher's Prussian forces arrived on the right flank of the French late in the afternoon. These tactics meant Wellington's lines were able to repel the last desperate French cavalry charges, which petered out.
By total contrast, Napoleon got everything wrong. He put the wrong generals in the wrong places. None of his attacks came off. One of them actually might not have even been ordered by him. It was a total accident. He started the battle too late. He made every mistake in the book. Wellington deserved to win the Battle of Waterloo, and Napoleon deserved to lose it.
Napoleon's army retreated from the battlefield in disarray. Waterloo had been lost. Napoleon's famous 100 days back in power was over.
After his defeat, Napoleon returned here to Paris, where power drifted away quickly. He abdicated once more, and staying in the country was no longer an option. He could be killed. He needed to get away quickly.
After his victory, Wellington moved his army south and soon occupied Paris. For Napoleon, however, there was to be no happy ending.
For more than 2 weeks, Napoleon considered his options while on the run in western France. Escape to America or somewhere else was considered, but eventually he gave himself up, hoping for asylum in Britain.
There is a point when he gets to the coast where he probably could have taken ship to America. It's difficult to really know. I think that is his main plan, to try and get to the States, where he probably will be welcomed. Because America and Britain have just been at war recently, the War of 1812. Now, he does have that opportunity at one stage, and he doesn't take it. And I honestly think that one of the problems is that Napoleon himself becomes very unsure about what he wants to do. And it's symptomatic of an awful lot of what you see in the 100 Days, an uncharacteristic lack of decisiveness.
It wasn't to happen. Instead, Napoleon was to be exiled not to an island in the Mediterranean, but thousands of miles away in the middle of the South Atlantic. The island was St. Helena. Zay Harding is travelling there from Cape Town on board the RMS St. Helena. It's the last authentic ocean-going Royal Mail ship from hundreds that once ventured to the outposts of the old British Empire. Now, as then, the ship is St. Helena's sole lifeline, carrying almost all the island's supplies.
You might be thinking, why the heck did they go through all this effort to bring Napoleon all the way out here? Well, you gotta remember that they sent him to exile once in Elba, and he got away. And then Waterloo happened. So this time they said, we're not taking any chances. Let's pick the most isolated, most remote place in the entire world and put him there. They were taking no chances. And I'm thinking he must have known his doom. He must have sensed it when he realized how far he was going, because there is absolutely nothing in any direction. It is just the middle of nowhere.
There's absolutely no way out for him on St. Helena. I think everybody knows that. Unlike in Elba, he's not allowed to write to anyone. He's not allowed contact with the outside world, direct contact. I think you've also got to factor in his health. Napoleon knows he's dying. He's been very ill on and off for a long time.
Another gorgeous day out at sea. Not much has changed, though. Same view as the day before and the day before that. But really, if I put it in perspective, Napoleon was on his ship for 2 months and all he had to look forward to was a lifetime of exile. And ahoy! Wow, there she is, St. Helena. What a beautiful sight.
With arrival only possible by sea, these dramatic, forbidding cliffs have greeted all travelers to St. Helena over the centuries. Most famously, Napoleon, but also Charles Darwin and legendary explorers such as Captain Cook. Formed by the peak of a huge extinct underwater volcano, measuring just 10 miles long by 5 miles wide, St. Helena's capital is tiny Jamestown.
That's kind of Jamestown now. You can just see kind of the bay kind of forming.
So where do we actually pull in? It doesn't look like we can land anywhere.
We see where all those boats are kind of moored.
Yeah.
We'll be mooring just in front of those.
Without a proper harbor, dock, or breakwater at Jamestown, the RMS simply has to come to a halt offshore.
Well, as you can see, not much has changed since the days of Napoleon. Still got to anchor and get ferried into land. Lucky the sea is quite calm today, or it could get pretty ugly. And touchdown! We made it! Wow, what a long way to get here. Woo.
When Napoleon landed here 2 centuries ago, he was also met by crowds of island locals.
Napoleon was such a world-famous figure that virtually the entire island came down to the waterfront to see his arrival. Ironically, because communication was slow and difficult, they weren't actually ready to accommodate him. So on the first night he was here, they put Napoleon and his entire entourage up at a boarding house, which was located just here. Quite a come down for an emperor, but not bad for a prisoner.
Back at my own accommodation, the Consulate Hotel just up the street, there are mementos of Napoleon everywhere, including a display cabinet in the lounge and lots of paintings in the cafe.
Here he is in his pomp, looking triumphant. And here he is, after he surrendered to the British, looking despondent. And rightfully so. He was never to see France again. All he had to look forward to was a life of exile in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean.
After his one night at the boarding house in Jamestown, Napoleon was moved to more secure accommodation in the countryside. To see where he lived and the rest of the island's Napoleonic sites, I find myself some transport. Only a mile or two out of Jamestown, the Briars Pavilion is the first stop on my tour of St. Helena's Napoleonic sites. It's where Napoleon spent his first 2 months before moving to Longwood for the rest of his time on the island. Under house arrest, Napoleon's brief stay at the Briars Pavilion was his happiest time on St. Helena, although it was tiny with just one room. As local guide Trevor Magellan explains, Napoleon was cheered up by a neighbor who visited often, a playful 13-year-old English girl called Betsy.
Sometimes her antics intrigued Napoleon. She would call him Boney.
Boney?
Yeah,
Like for Bonaparte?
That's a phone.
Oh,
yeah.
man.
She would take his sword and she would chase him around the room.
No, she would take his sword and chase Napoleon.
Yeah.
Nobody does that.
Nobody does that, eh?
But he lets her get away because she's a child.
Yeah, she could get away with it.
Yeah, and little Betsy rejuvenated his spirit.
Absolutely. And the affection that young Betsy showed him, it really touched him. I think for a short period of time you could forget that he was a prisoner on this remote little island.
Napoleon couldn't forget he was a prisoner for long, however. Not only were there thousands of British troops on the island guarding him, but many of them were based at the island's biggest fort, which directly overlooks Briars Pavilion.
On the top of that hill, That's the Hainault Fort.
Huh, it's a good spot for a fort, huh?
Yeah.
Hainault Fort dates all the way back to 1798, but it was greatly reinforced during Napoleon's stay on the island in order to prevent any chance of him escaping. In fact, so many extra British troops came here to St. Helena in 1815 that the island's population doubled.
Wow, look at the view. What a perfect place to build a fort. With a 360-degree vantage point, and with all the guns and all the soldiers they had up here, the British really had the defense of this island covered. Ha! There's the Briars Pavilion right there. The fort could not be in a better position to keep Napoleon under tight surveillance.
The weather, however, can change rapidly up in St. Helena's hills. Unfortunately for Napoleon, Longwood House, where he and his entourage were moved from the pleasant but cramped Briars Pavilion, has a particularly unpleasant microclimate and is all too regularly cold, cloudy, wet, and windy. Given to France by Queen Victoria long after Napoleon's death, today Longwood House is looked after by a French honorary consul, Michel d'Antoine Martineau.
The weather changes. It wasn't like this down in Jamestown.
That's Longwood for you.
It's always like this?
Most of the time,
Really?
yes. 300 days a year, like that.
So we're up in the clouds, I guess. So it's
yes,
always like this?
It's always like that. And we are in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
Wait to be at 6 o'clock.
Cold and
it's miserable.
damn.
Please come in.
Thank you.
So here we are in the house that we are restoring into its 1821 aspect, the exact date of his death, so the 5th of May, 1821. It's the fame of this house came from the fact that Napoleon died. This room is called the billiard room because in 1815 there was a billiard table which Napoleon used for his maps because he used this room as a workplace for dictating his memoirs.
So it is maps spread out in his re-examined battles and his military campaigns.
Yes, to try to understand if he may have done some mistakes, where they come from, and what's the reason for that, and
Like
what.
at Waterloo.
So Waterloo is actually interesting in that respect because it's one of the battles he spoke the most here, because he lost it. So then there was a lot of if, what would have happened if. So it's actually a good...
Got obsessed with it. Yeah.
Not obsessed, because he just wanted to understand where it went wrong, and that's it.
Yeah, he was a very strategic man, and so he didn't just care about winning, he wanted to know why he lost.
Also, how we can wrap it up to the public. So, so of course, like the propaganda is very important.
His whole life was like that.
Yeah.
He dictated how history was going to remember.
It's a good point, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was writing his own final chapter.
Yeah, yeah.
We can split the exile in two parts. The very creative first 3 years, which was dictating into like a hard labor with discipline on working hours, to the last 2.5 years, which was just focusing on his sickness, his gloom, his unhappiness, and is waiting for his death, really.
In his mind, he was already dead.
Yes, definitely. And the only concern he had was where does he have pain today?
Sounds depressing and dark.
It is, like the weather.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. They go hand in hand. Interesting.
Longwood's frequent wet weather literally seeped into the walls of the house, and as the wallpaper peeled off in the damp, it had to be replaced with muslin cloth.
The water was actually running through the wall and the wood floor, and the rat was crawling on stagnant water underneath.
Sounds disgusting.
So the house was literally falling apart.
So they put up this linen to cover, to mask what was going on below?
Absolutely. So the water can run on the back, and then it will hide the misery. But it didn't sort out the problem of the damp, and of course there was stagnant water underneath where rats were crawling.
So there were rats everywhere?
Yes, and they were crawling everywhere, not only under the floor, but also in the furniture. Yeah. A true anecdote, some British were actually visiting Napoleon, and they saw actually his hat, you know, was actually laid on the sideboard, walking on its own.
Oh man, this was a rat inside.
Yes. So, as you can understand, this extremely unhealthy environment makes him even sicker and sicker by the days, and that just led to his death.
It all contributed to it.
Yeah.
Some people have even suggested that the wallpaper itself was the main cause of Napoleon's death, as it contained arsenic, which could have poisoned him when damp. But Napoleon had long suffered from a badly perforated stomach ulcer, and the official cause of his death, according to his doctors, was stomach cancer.
And this is the room where he died on the 5th of May 1821. And of course, his last wish that he wrote on his will is to be buried in France in the middle of his beloved people. But of course, the British didn't give him that ultimate permission. So he was buried on the island to a spot he also designated in case. But the tomb is definitely a beginning of another story.
Napoleon's tomb is situated just a short stroll from Longwood House, in a peaceful, secluded valley that was one of Napoleon's favorite walking spots.
Well, Napoleon might have been denied his wish to be buried in France, but he sure did pick a beautiful spot here on St. Helena for his tomb. The odd thing about the tomb is there's no name on it. This is because Napoleon wanted just his first name on it, Napoleon, which was customary for royalty. But the British refused because they didn't want to acknowledge that he was an emperor. They said, "We'll print your full name, Napoleon Bonaparte, just like an ordinary person." Napoleon thought this was beneath his dignity. So they had to come up with a compromise, and the result was no name at all.
Napoleon's body, however, is no longer in this tomb. At the request of the French government, some 20 years after he was buried here, his body was disinterred and returned to France, where he was reburied with great pomp and ceremony in Paris.
Back in England, Wellington's career had gone from strength to strength.
Waterloo was a triumph not only for Wellington but for Britain. Wellington returned here to London a national hero.
After returning to England, Wellington bought a home on the corner of Hyde Park at the junction of what is today's Piccadilly, Park Lane and Knightsbridge, just across the road from Buckingham Palace. The Duke lived here for over 30 years. Over time, this became a grand residence, as befitting a war hero whose victory at Waterloo had changed the course of European history. The house is still occupied today by the current and now 9th Duke of Wellington. But the Duke's huge art collection began almost by accident. Napoleon's brother Joseph had stolen paintings from the Spanish royal collection in Madrid before they were discovered and impounded by Wellington's army en route back to France.
He had the great good fortune at the Battle of Vittoria to capture a large collection of paintings which had been in Joseph Bonaparte's baggage train. He didn't know it at the time, of course, but when these paintings were sent to London to be catalogued and looked at, they turned out to be an extraordinary collection of pictures.
Wellington tried to return the pictures, but the restored and grateful Spanish monarchy refused, saying he should keep them.
On that basis, all these pictures became a gift from Spain to the Duke.
As the Duke says, if Joseph Bonaparte hadn't stolen these paintings from Madrid's palaces, they wouldn't have ended up here.
In this room, the Waterloo Gallery, many of the paintings, in fact, nearly all of the paintings, came from the Spanish Royal Collection. And over here, for example, there's a wonderful painting, one of my favorites, by Murillo. Unfortunately, we don't know who the sitter is, but I always have thought it's such a strong image, such a strong portrait. And next door to it is a charming small Rubens, which is also very touching, I always think, of a nun. So it just, when one looks around the room, there are just so many wonderful paintings, and one can, even I, and I live here, come and look at them and look at different paintings and realize what an incredible collection it is.
These paintings are just one of many gifts given to the Duke by grateful governments and monarchs across Europe.
These huge torches come from Russia. They were a gift from the Tsar of Russia, the Siberian porphyry. There's a very similar pair in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg.
I noticed there's quite a few paintings of Napoleon.
Yes, interesting that, isn't it? There are many images of Napoleon and other members of his family. There are paintings, there are busts, and of course downstairs in this house is that enormous, colossal sculpture by Canova of Napoleon naked. Napoleon himself commissioned it from Canova, the leading sculptor of the day. He was by then Emperor of France, but I don't think he envisaged that he would be sculpted in the nude. When the piece arrived in Paris, Napoleon was horrified. It went straight back in its box and was relegated to the basement of the Louvre, where it stayed for 10 or 12 years.
The giant statue was one of numerous gifts to Wellington by the British government.
It's been here for nearly 200 years. The floor had to be reinforced in order to take it, and it is the first thing that anybody sees when they come into this house.
Throughout the house, there are magnificent gifts from other appreciative rulers. These fabulous, rare stone-topped tables are from Russian Tsar Alexander, and these table services from Prussia, Russia, and beyond, all used for entertaining at the vast banquets held regularly in Wellington's London home. These table services are impressive, although the most magnificent piece can be found in the state dining room.
This dining table takes just over 30 people, and all the pictures in the room are of the reigning monarchs at the time of Waterloo and immediately afterwards.
This incredible Portuguese table service was presented to the Duke by a grateful Prince Regent of Portugal. Wellington's victories in the Peninsular Wars against Napoleon's armies in Spain and Portugal helped blunt the Emperor's ambitions on the continent. His military victories are celebrated by these beautiful and elaborate silver placeholders. The setting contains more than 1,000 pieces. Motives are from the classical tradition, including dancing nymphs and a winged figure of victory with a foot on the Iberian Peninsula. Every year, on the anniversary of the battle, a banquet would be held here for the great and the good, with the table service at its centre. On the walls of the state dining rooms, still here today, are giant portraits of the grateful European monarchs who lavished gifts on Wellington. The Duke was a big supporter of the established royal order, who were also, of course, at war with Napoleon. This is Louis XVIII, the French Bourbon king, son of Louis XVI, executed during the French Revolution, restored to the throne for a time after the fall of Napoleon. This is Francis I, Emperor of Austria, William I, King of Holland, Frederick III, King of Prussia, Alexander I, Tsar of Russia, and of course, George IV, King of England.
The one of the King George IV in Highland dress was painted by Sir David Wilkie, but after the king died, Sir David wrote to the Duke saying that unfortunately he had never been paid. So it ended up that the Duke had to pay Wilkie for the present given to him by the king.
Always a natural leader, Wellington entered politics, eventually rising to become Prime Minister 13 years after his victory at Waterloo. Wellington was conservative, a supporter of the status quo, an admirer of Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger, who was Prime Minister during the early part of the Napoleonic Wars. But Wellington's term as Prime Minister was short-lived.
The Duke of Wellington was probably the worst Prime Minister of the 19th century. He was a complete failure. He lasted 2 years, but really he knew and everybody else knew that he was not a politician. He'd actually started off being a politician. He was an MP before he was a general, but he was completely useless at it. At his first cabinet meeting, he said, after he came out of it, he said, you know, I gave them all their orders and they just sat around continuing to talk. So he took very much a general's view of politics, and that just simply doesn't do in an era of representative government.
I don't think he was as successful as a politician as he had been as a military commander, but his period as Prime Minister is often underestimated because he did carry perhaps the most important piece of legislation of that moment, which was the Catholic Emancipation Act, and probably only somebody as skillful as the Duke of Wellington could have carried that legislation.
In late 1841, 20 years after his death in St. Helena, Napoleon left the island for the long journey back to his beloved France and its capital, Paris.
Like so much else with Napoleon, it's utterly unprecedented, and if you stand back from it and try and get it in any kind of context, you can't find one.
On a bitterly cold December day, much like today, a barge carrying Napoleon's body made its way up the River Seine before a funeral procession through the streets, which would be watched by a crowd of almost 1 million people, to be buried here at Les Invalides, the military's headquarters in Paris. Napoleon's wish was always to be buried by the Seine in the city he loved and which had always supported him. Napoleon had always taken great interest in Les Invalides as a place and institution, organising ceremonies here, re-establishing it as a home for old soldiers and as a burial place for great military commanders. Ironically, Napoleon's final resting place was inside the vast Church of the Dome, originally built by the Sun King, Louis XIV, as a royal chapel. Napoleon's tomb here is a massive structure, but it was nearly 20 years after his funeral before it was completed. It's been here since 1861. The curator of the Tomb Napoleon is Emily Robb.
This is the place where the standards taken from the enemy were brought, and this is the place where Napoleon himself made the ashes of very famous military commanders come back, such as Turenne or Vauban, that you can see here and there. So it's quite logical that Napoleon finds himself here right now. This crypt was constructed around a very simple idea. All around in the corridor, you will find reliefs describing what Napoleon did for France. There's 10 of these reliefs, each and every one of them explaining one of his great achievements, such as the establishment of the Légion d'honneur, building and renovating great buildings throughout France, reforming the economy, trying to make a French education better, etc.
Inside the sarcophagus, Napoleon's body is encased in 6 coffins, one of marble, one of tin, one of mahogany, 2 of lead, and 1 of ebony. Also buried here, members of his family, including his older brother Joseph, who'd lived the rest of his life in exile, having reinvented himself in America, before dying in Rome in 1844.
When you go closer to the tomb, there are these statues here, which stand for victories, and specifically the victories which names are written on the pavement, reminding us of the greatest victories achieved by Napoleon's army, such as Austerlitz, the Battle of Marengo, the battles of the Pyramids, etc.
Long after his entombment, the debate in France about Napoleon's legacy raged on. He may have been a self-proclaimed man of the people, but Napoleon was a divisive figure. A legacy summed up in the treatment meted out to one of the many monuments erected in his honour at the Place Vendôme in the centre of Paris. This cast column depicting the Emperor Napoleon as a 19th century Julius Caesar was erected on the order of Napoleon himself in 1810, after arguably his greatest military victory at the Battle of Austerlitz in Czechoslovakia. The shell of the column itself was constructed from metal salvaged from Austrian cannons taken in the battle. In 1814, after Napoleon's first abdication and exile to Elba, the column was torn down. It was erected again with a new Napoleon on top in 1823, soon after Napoleon's death. In the Revolution of 1861, it was destroyed again, only to be rebuilt for a third time in 1875. It's this version that survives to this day. Napoleon certainly left his mark on Paris. The Arc de Triomphe, commemorating French military victories, including many of his own, was his idea. Grand city planning, which involved the construction of vast avenues, like the Rue de Rivoli, named after another military success, was Napoleon too. The city's display of Egyptian iconography began with his military adventures in the Middle East. Napoleon was a man of culture, and this obelisk was erected by King Louis Philippe, who brought Napoleon back from St. Helena as part of a process of national reconciliation. Napoleon also established the Banque de France and the stock exchange, but it was probably his achievements in the civil arena that have been his most enduring.
The Code Napoleon was the most impressive of all his achievements. He himself realised that his battles weren't going to last forever, but the Code Napoleon could. It was an extraordinary achievement. He brought 42 different legal codes, some of them based on the old Roman system, some of them actually contradictory with the others, and got it down just to simply one body of laws. And those laws, or forms of them, can now be seen in 40 countries across 5 continents. It's an astonishing legacy.
Across the Channel, Napoleon's nemesis, the Duke of Wellington, was still alive and resident of Apsley House at the time of Napoleon's second burial, 20 years after the first. In later years, he could be seen taking an early ride in Hyde Park next door. The house, now a museum, was crammed full of Napoleonic memorabilia, Waterloo war booty from the victory that defined him. These are Napoleonic battle standards and Napoleon's swords from Waterloo, taken from his carriage by a Prussian soldier as the Emperor made his escape. And this Egyptian dessert service, originally a divorce present from Napoleon to the Empress Josephine. She rejected it. Later it was given to Wellington by the grateful Bourbon King Louis XVIII, reinstated, as you recall, to the throne after Napoleon's downfall. The Duke was to outlive Napoleon by more than 30 years. This photo was taken of the Duke in the earliest days of photography, shortly before he died. Wellington lived some of his later years in the country at his estate in Hampshire, Stratfield-Say.
The estate was bought by the Duke in 1819 with money voted to him by Parliament as a reward for his victory at Waterloo. At the time, the estate was far larger than the 8,000 acres it is today.
The Duke's descendants still live here today, and the stables have been turned into a museum as well. The horse played a major role in 19th century battles. Napoleon may have had his distinct white Arabian stallions, but here at Stratfield-Say, under a giant oak tree, is buried Copenhagen, Wellington's favourite charger, the horse he rode for 13 continuous hours at Waterloo. Copenhagen lived another 21 years here at Stratfield-Say before dying in 1836. But pride of place goes to the Duke's funeral carriage.
Wellington's victory at Waterloo defined the rest of his life. In fact, the lower part of this giant funeral carriage, which weighs 18 tonnes, was actually constructed from guns captured at the battle.
Like Napoleon's reburial in Paris, the Duke's funeral, when he died aged 84 in 1852, was one of the biggest public events of the 19th century. It was certainly the biggest funeral ever to occur in Britain. Hundreds of thousands lined the route as the giant funeral carriage made its way through London, past the Duke's home, number 1 London.
The funeral procession ended here on the steps of St Paul's.
As with England's other Napoleonic war hero, Nelson, almost 50 years earlier, Wellington was laid to rest in the crypt of St Paul's, where he remains to this day. 30 years later, a giant monument to Wellington riding Copenhagen was erected on the cathedral floor. Wellington's final resting place, although grand, was far more modest than Napoleon's. Wellington may have won at Waterloo, but Napoleon lived bigger.
2 centuries after the Battle of Waterloo, it's very clear that Napoleon is by far the most famous. When one looks at his cult, really, in China, in India, in Japan, he's an enormous figure, and the Duke of Wellington, for all his success at the battle, simply isn't. And that will carry on as well. Even when one goes to Waterloo, you'd have thought, in fact, the battle was won by Napoleon when one looks at the names of the cafes and the shops and so on. He is still the iconic, charismatic leader.
I think his overriding strength was the common sense that he exhibited in so many of his decisions, and his forethought. He planned things so well in advance. He reconnoitred Belgium in 1814, but he actually visited the site which became the battlefield of Waterloo. He had extraordinary forethought.
On St Helena, Napoleon had said, "My life has been a novel," and so it proved.
Napoleon was a very ambitious man, and that can be regarded as a strength and as a weakness. He wanted to be Alexander the Great's equal, and he managed it because he had the will and the strength to do it, and he had the skill to manipulate, to seduce, and to conquer both the countries and the hearts. His weakness was exactly the same. Because he was so ambitious, he maybe lost sight of what was real and thought himself too great. Love because he gave France hopes and ambitions, but hate because losses, wars, all the blood and all these things that made France look bad in the eyes of the others.
The prestige of Britain rose immeasurably. After Waterloo, there was a long period of peace in Europe. He very much believed in cooperation in Europe. I'm quite sure he would not have wanted to be part of a political party that had wanted to not be part of Europe.
Of Waterloo, Wellington had remarked, "It was the nearest run thing you ever saw in your life. Never was I so near to being beat." Today, the site of the Battle of Waterloo and the area surrounding it has become a popular location for visiting tourists. There are monuments commemorating the battle, and modern-day reenactments occur each year on the anniversary of the battle. There is also a museum displaying a reenactment of the battle, as Katie Haswell finds out.
This is a 360-degree panorama of how the battle would have looked, and it was done in 1912. Back in those days, it was a huge attraction because, of course, it was a precursor to the cinema, so people used to flock here to see this. It took a team of artists 10 months to paint this, and it's historically correct. They had experts, etc., to check out the uniforms. It's exactly as it was painted then, although I think they've probably added the sound effects.
Nearby, it's also possible to visit the farmhouse where Napoleon stayed the night before the battle.
This is the farmhouse where Napoleon spent his last night before the battle. Apparently he arrived about 8 o'clock in the evening, had some supper, dictated his war plan, and then hit the hay. And that's the very bed that he slept on, in this particular room. Of course, he got up the next morning, fought the battle, lost it, and was exiled. He died in St. Helena, and that's his death mask.